For decades, the appearance of a world teacher, a savior, has been anticipated by the faithful in both hemispheres. Not only by the Christian faithful who look for the reappearance of the Christ, but by those who await Maitreya Buddha, the Hindus who look for the return of Krishna, as well as those who expect the Imam Mahdi and the Messiah. However, in esoteric studies, we know that the Christ principle is an office of hierarchy. This office is now held by the Lord Maitreya. It is thought that he was the being who overshadowed Lord Krishna some 5,000 years ago, just like he overshadowed his disciple Jesus 2,000 years ago. If Lord Maitreya, the Christ, plans to reappear, this time he will not come alone. He will be assisted by the ascended masters of wisdom. When men feel they have exhausted all their own resources and have come to an end of all their own innate possibilities, and that the problems and conditions confronting them are beyond their solving or handling, they are apt to look for a divine intermediary and for the mediator who will plead their cause with God and bring rescue. They look for a savior. Christ is believed by millions to act as the divine mediator between humanity and divinity. I have come that they may have life, says the Christ. The whole system of spiritual revelation is based on this doctrine of interdependence from God in the secret place of the Most High to the humblest human being living and struggling and sorrowing on earth. Always, the appropriate mechanism is found through which divinity can reach and communicate with humanity. Someone is expected, and his coming is anticipated. When the times are ripe, the invocation of the masses is strident enough, and the faith of those who know is keen enough, then always he has come. And today will be no exception to this universal law.
There is no doubt of the new spiritual awakening that is taking place everywhere, which we will eventually lead to an era of brotherhood, the keynote of the coming age of Aquarius. What is happening now is the outcome of inner and outer forces which are affecting great changes in human thinking and consciousness. The end result will be a reorganization of world institutions and social structures which no longer can meet or answer man's true needs. Throughout the world, the new approaches to reality are emerging, and the new values which should govern our life in the coming age are beginning to be defined. This will entail the reorganization of our political, economic, and financial systems along more rational and just lines. In the field of economics, implementing the principle of sharing the world's resources in a world of plenty should be seen as the overriding priority. The division between the living standards of the West and those of the Third World must be addressed into a more equitable sense of fairness. There will be sacrifices necessary, and resistance will be met to live more simply. But in the long term, this will create more stability and peace on Earth. The present political...
When you have a little happy smile on your face, then...
Why do we love popping little plastic bubbles?
The present political system will be in various stages of transition. The present and growing interest in environmental and ecological problems can be seen as the logical outcome of the gradual awareness in humanity that we are not a separate entity of the planet, but an integrated part of the greater whole, which includes all kingdoms in nature. greater world harmony will result. To many today, this awareness includes the recognition of higher states of consciousness attained by those who make up the emerging spiritual kingdom, the masters and initiates of the world. Their existence was first revealed in modern times by H.B. Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophical Society, as long ago as 1875. A more detailed communication about the masters and their work was given by Alice A. Bailey between 1919 and 1949. Also by occult author Mary Gray and the Agni Yogi teachings written through Helena Roerich by the Master Moria.
It is evident that man has made a great advance from his primitive beginnings. Each civilization and culture has seen humanity step forward a little further in the expression of its potential. Many believe that this evolutionary process has been guided for millennia according to a plan by these more highly evolved men, known to esotericists as the spiritual hierarchy. The history of mankind can be seen as the response to the ideas released sequentially into the world by them, to bring about the advances in knowledge and wisdom of which the creative arts, sciences, politics, and religions are the expression. At the head of this hierarchy stands the Christ, embodied in himself the divine principle of love. He was the first to reveal to men the true nature of God. We are all gods, all children of the one Father, the Christ has told us. The reason he has not come again is that his followers in all countries have not done the needed work. His coming is largely dependent upon the establishing of right human relations, and so he has waited. But his hour has now come, because of the people's need in every land, and because of the evocative cry of the masses everywhere, and the advice of his disciples of all faiths and of all religions. It is not yet for us to know the date or hour of the reappearance of the Christ.
This hierarchy of disciples are the custodians of the plan for the evolution of humanity and the kingdoms in nature. This plan works out through the agency of the esoteric hierarchy of masters who watch over all world events and constitute the invisible government of the planet. The masters of wisdom are those members of the human family who have made the evolutionary journey ahead of us, who, having perfected themselves by the same steps by which we advance, have accepted the responsibility of guiding the rest of us to that same achievement. They have been behind the whole evolutionary process, guiding and helping man through gradual expansion of consciousness to reveal sequentially his innate divinity and to become like them, divine, perfected, illumined beings.
Christianity today has splintered into numerous subgroups, with over 250 Bible translations being calculated. New biblical writings are still being discovered. As recently as the 1950s, the Gnostic Bible was unearthed in a remote desert. Most of the Bible texts were written in simple parables and allegories. Necessarily, they are largely symbolic in their presentation, with deeply esoteric pearls of wisdom hidden beneath for those who have the insight to discover. Man's mental capacities are largely dualistic: good, evil, heaven, earth, believer, non-believer, etc., which has pitted group against group and undermined the universal importance of Christ's simple teaching of love and forbearance while strengthening man's separative tendencies. Hence it began that one was considered a believer or a heretic, and the means of political control were in place with the church as ruling government. Essentially, the church needed to be an intermediary or control point between man and God. If man had been allowed to understand and develop his own direct relationship with the divine, then the controlling structure would have been lost by the religious and political entities of the day. This is not to say the church didn't play a positive authoritarian role, albeit a limited and negative role for many others. The term Christ, or the Anointed One, means he embodies the Christ principle, which is a level of divine consciousness of a very high degree. The main distinction which separates the exoteric side of the story with the esoteric side of the story is that Jesus and the Christ are two separate, although united beings. The life and history of Jesus is well known. However, the life of Christ, or Maitreya, is very much unknown to most of mankind, and is only known from the occult point of view. The origin and development of the human soul stretches far beyond what either modern science or religion is able to realize. The point of man's evolution began when our souls individualized and consequently created the human kingdom upon our planet. This roughly occurred between 18 million and 21 million years ago. The soul is the point where matter and spirit meet. Yet our souls are in an evolutionary journey before they return to the source. So in order to understand the complete evolution of man, we must realize that our souls manifest themselves not only through a body, but through a personality, which is composed of three bodies: physical, emotional, and mental. This process of individualization began back in what was known as the Lemurian Age, about 18 million years ago. Lemuria was a massive continent which once existed in the Pacific Ocean. This is where our individualized souls began their evolutionary journey. In esoteric lore, this was also known as the third root race. There, the primary focus was the coordination and control of our physical bodies. Yet at the same time, we only had a feeble emotional nature and a germ of mind. It is also where the myths and legends of giants come from, as our physical bodies were much larger and more coarse than they are now. For millions of years, this process unfolded until our physical bodies became somewhat perfected. The goal of the next race, the fourth root race, was therefore the development of our emotional or astral bodies. The fourth root race, also known as the Atlantean race, was where man reached a point of more refinement and spiritual insight. During the Atlantean civilization, man's emotional nature became very powerful and centralized in his response. In the middle of the Atlantean race, an extraordinary event occurred. Our souls had reached a certain point in their evolution where the door in which the animal man passed into the human kingdom was closed, and the guides of the race opened up a new door in which man could pass out of the human kingdom and into the superhuman or spiritual kingdom. The Lord Maitreya, initially a human like us, was the first man in the Earth scheme to pass through the rigorous portals of initiation and to step out of the human kingdom and enter the superhuman or divine kingdom of God. Others also passed through the portals of initiation during the mid-Atlantean times. The Buddha, a brother of the Christ, also became a master during this time frame and went on to overshadow Prince Gautama, approximately 600 years before the birth of Jesus. During Atlantis, as the planetary hierarchy of masters was overseeing the development of the race, many of the masters walked openly with mankind. The great civilization of Atlantis was stimulated by the hierarchy, and advanced knowledge, science, and technology were all given to men by the masters. However, this resulted in many disastrous events. The minds of men were not yet sufficiently developed to handle much of that knowledge being handed down to them. That knowledge was not transmuted into wisdom. It was misused and thus resulted in slavery, genetic manipulation, mind control, and eventually a great battle between the forces of light and of darkness ensued. Mankind was overtaken and overwhelmed by the forces of materiality and selfishness, and because of man's free will, he was unduly influenced by the lords of materiality, while provoking the earthly demonic and elemental forces for which he was unequipped to handle. In large part, he became selfish, evil, indulgent in black magic, and eventually destroyed himself with most of humanity. Due to karmic effects, Atlantis was destroyed through a sequence of catastrophic events that periodically swept the whole continent underwater. The sinking of Atlantis happened through 4 main stages, beginning roughly 4 million years ago and climaxing about 12,000 years ago. Afterwards, the whole continent, which stretched across the Atlantic Ocean, vanished completely. The great civilization of Atlantis, which existed for millions of years, was now gone. By design, the remaining descendants of Atlantis and certain mysteries were re-established in the first Hindu, Egyptian, and Mayan colonies. After Atlantis, the hierarchy of masters remained esoteric and hidden among men, while the development of the present 5th root race had begun. But as the ages passed, divine embodiments or avatars, such as Rama, Krishna, Buddha, and finally the Christ, manifested on earth to show a new way forward for man. By the time of the Christ, the mental aspect of man had evolved sufficiently so that he was somewhat capable of comprehending the true meaning of the Christ's teachings. Maitreya had evolved even further beyond a master and was now a lord. This great being used the esoteric process of overshadowing Jesus primarily for the last 3 years of his life's mission. Jesus was already a 3rd-degree initiate and the chosen vehicle for the manifestation of the Christ on earth. Man was deemed ready for a new understanding of himself, his place in the world, and capable of responding to the energies of the Age of Pisces being inaugurated by the Christ. The life and message of Jesus has largely been misinterpreted through the ages, and the churches have often missed the crucial point of his message. They have embarked on converting people into their way of thinking as Christians, and too often have not demonstrated the simple message of love and compassion for others. This straying from the path has been a part of man's evolutionary journey, and in large part due to the 6-ray energies of the Piscean age. These energies are idealistic and devotional, but often fanatical and separative in their lower manifestation. However, the times have changed, as we have begun to enter the age of Aquarius with its more inclusive, group-oriented, and collective energies. Everywhere we look at the old political, economic, social, and religious structures crumbling to make way for the new. These new institutions will be designed to better serve the whole of humanity as opposed to the few. Much of mankind is now ready for further revelation and a greater demonstration of divinity. As in the past, the Christ awaits his reappearance in the outer world. This comes at a time when the world has shrunk, and little of importance happens that isn't known by much of humanity. The beast has been let loose, and that the hierarchy considered the Great War from 1914 to 1945 as one war which would decipher the outcome of man's destiny upon the planet. In fact, World War I and World War II were a recapitulation of the Great Atlantean Conflict, also known in Hindu text as the Mahabharata. A lot of old, negative, and evil energy that manifested in Atlantis spilled out in World War II, hence the Nazis' interest in the occult. The destiny of mankind was at stake, and much was risked. The forces of light defeated the forces of evil, and the war was won. Battles still rage, but the door where evil dwells will soon be shut for the first time in history, and man will see a light unlike ever before. This light he will now be able to comprehend and use for his own good while invoking a greater degree of divine energies. Man is now poised to build a greater civilization than that of Atlantis and truly step into the golden age in his quest to create heaven on earth.
When the Christ, the avatar of love, makes his reappearance, then will the sons of men, who are now the sons of God, withdraw their faces from the shining light and radiate that light upon the sons of men, who know not yet they are the sons of God. Then shall the coming one appear, his footsteps hasten through the valley of the shadow by the one of awful power, who stands upon the mountain top, breathing out love eternal, light supernal and peaceful, silent will. Then will the sons of men respond. Then will a newer light shine forth into the dismal, weary veil of earth. So peace will come again on earth, but a peace unlike aught known before.
An avatar, which is a Sanskrit word that means he descends from far away, is one who has a peculiar capacity to transmit energy or divine power. This is necessarily a deep mystery and was demonstrated in a peculiar manner and in relation to cosmic energy by the Christ, who for the first time in planetary history, as far as we know, transmitted the divine energy of love directly to our planet, and in a most definite sense, to humanity. All we really know is that down through the ages, great and divine representatives of God embody divine purpose and affect the entire world in such a manner that their names and their influences are known and felt thousands of years after they no longer walk among men.
If it is true that Christ plans to reappear, if it is a fact that he will bring his disciples, the masters of wisdom, with him, and if this coming is imminent, what are some of the factors that he must take into consideration? First of all, he will come to a world that is essentially one world. His reappearance and his consequent work cannot be confined to one small locality or domain unheard of by the great majority, as was the case when he was here before. The radio, the press, and the dissemination of news, and now the internet, will make his coming different than of any previous messenger. The swift modes of transportation will make him available to countless millions, and by boat, rail, and plane will they be able to reach him. Through television and the internet, his face can be made familiar to all, and verily, every eye shall see him. Even if there is no general recognition of his spiritual status and message, there must necessarily be a universal interest. For today, even the many false Christs and messengers are finding this universal curiosity and cannot be hidden. This creates a unique condition in which to work, one in which no salvaging, energizing Son of God has ever before had to face. There has been a useful and wholesome swing away from churchianity and from Orthodox religion during the past century, and this will present a unique opportunity for the restoration of true religion and the presentation of a simple return to the ways of spiritual living. The priests, the Levites, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees were not the ones who recognized him when he came before. They feared him, and it is highly improbable that the reactionary churchmen will be the ones to recognize him today. He may appear in a totally unexpected guise. Who is to say whether he will come as a politician, an economist, a leader of the people arising from the midst of them, or a scientist or artist? It is a fallacy to believe, as some do, that the main trend of Christ's work will be through the medium of the churches or the world religions. In the Middle Ages of history and earlier, it was the churches and the schools of philosophy which provided the major avenues for his subjective activity, but will not be so when he is objectively and actually here. This is a point that the churches and organized religions would do well to remember. There is now a shift of his emphasis and attention into two new fields of endeavor. First, into the field of worldwide education, and secondly, into the sphere of implementing intelligently those activities which come under the Department of Government in its three aspects of statesmanship, of politics, and of legislation. The common people are today awakening to the importance and responsibility of government. It is, therefore, realized by the hierarchy that before the cycle of true democracy, as it essentially exists and will eventually demonstrate, can come into being, the education of the masses in cooperative statesmanship and economic stabilization through right sharing and in clean political interplay is imperatively necessary. The long divorce between religion and politics must be ended, and this can now come about because of the high level of the human mass intelligence, and the fact that science has made all men so close that what happens in some remote area of the Earth's surface is a matter of general interest within a few minutes. This makes it uniquely possible for him to work in the future. The development of spiritual recognition is the great need today in preparation for his reappearance. No one knows of what nation he will come. He may appear as an Englishman, a Russian, an African, a Latin, a Turk, a Hindu, or of any other nationality. Who can say which? He may be a Christian or a Hindu by faith, a Buddhist, or of no particular faith at all. He will not come as the restorer of any of the ancient religions, including Christianity, but he will come to restore man's faith in the Father's love, in the fact of the livingness of the Christ, and in the close, subjective, and unbreakable relationship of all men everywhere. The facilities of the entire world of contact and relation will be at his disposal. That will be part of the uniqueness of his opportunity, and for this he too must prepare.